Greetings, readers, and welcome to Book Buzz. I'm Sarah Reed, the Reader's Advisory Librarian at the Oshkosh Public Library, and I want to welcome you to our special spooky season October episode of Book Buzz. I've been looking forward to this one. If you've met me, you know that horror is my favorite genre. I read lots of horror books. I even write lots of horror books like these ones. And I write short stories, which you can find in lots of places. So this is probably the most exciting episode for me so far. It's going to have a little bit of a different format. Instead of just telling you about new releases, I'm going to tell you about my 3 favorite horror books of all time. And then I'm going to tell you about 5 recently released horror books that I enjoyed a lot. And I'm going to tell you about 5 soon-to-be-released horror books that I'm very excited about. Does that sound good to you? All right, then let's get into it. I could have done 50 of my favorite horror books of all time, but for brevity's sake, I narrowed it down to the 3 that I tend to recommend the most. We're going to start with The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones, my favorite horror author currently, this week. For a lot of weeks. He's really good. From USA Today bestselling author Stephen Graham Jones comes a masterpiece of a novel about revenge, cultural identity, and the cost of breaking from tradition. Labeled one of 2020's buzziest horror novels, this is a remarkable horror story that will give you nightmares. The good kind, of course. This novel is equal parts psychological horror and cutting social commentary on identity politics and the American Indian experience. Fans of Jordan Peele and Tommy Orange will love this story as it follows the lives of 4 American Indian men and their families, all haunted by a disturbing, deadly event that took place in their youth. Years later, they find themselves tracked by an entity bent on revenge, totally helpless as the culture and traditions they left behind catch up to them in a violent, vengeful way. Now, Stephen Graham Jones is known for his slashers, very popular for his My Heart is a Chainsaw trilogy. Wonderful writer. He always brings a lot of emotion into the books. So they're slashers, they're classic slashers, but with big feelings, which is what I love about him so much. Next up, we have Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. New York Times bestseller described as Lovecraft meets the Brontes in Latin America. I mean, that's a perfect recipe. What's not to love? This book was named one of Time's 100 Best Mystery and Thriller Books of All Time, winner of the Locus Award, nominated for the Bram Stoker Award, one of the best books of the year named by The New Yorker, Vanity Fair, NPR, The Washington Post, Tor.com, Mary Claire, Vox, Mashable, Men's Health, Library Journal, Book Riot, and Library Reads. So I'm not the only one who loved this book, clearly, and I think you'll love it too. It is set in glamorous 1950s Mexico. After receiving a frantic letter from her newlywed cousin begging for someone to save her from a mysterious doom, Noemi Taboada heads to High Place, a distant house in the Mexican countryside. She's not sure what she'll find. Her cousin's husband, a handsome Englishman, is a stranger, and Noemi knows little about the region. Noemi is also an unlikely rescuer. She's a glamorous debutante, and her chic gowns and perfect red lipstick are more suited for cocktail parties than amateur sleuthing. But she's also tough and smart with an indomitable will, and she's not afraid. Not of her cousin's new husband, who is both menacing and alluring. Not of his father, the ancient patriarch, who seems to be fascinated by Noemi. And not even of the house itself, which begins to invade Noemi's dreams with visions of blood and doom. Her only ally in this inhospitable abode is the family's youngest son. Shy and gentle, he seems to want to help Noemi, but might also be hiding dark knowledge of his family's past, for there are many secrets behind the walls of High Place. The family's once colossal wealth and faded mining empire kept them from prying eyes, but as Noemi digs deeper, she unearths stories of violence and madness. And Noemi, mesmerized by the terrifying yet seductive world of High Place, may soon find it impossible to ever leave this enigmatic house behind. Classic Gothic, but with a twist. Very good book. Now, number 3 of my all-time favorite horror books this week is The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. It was the winner of the British Fantasy Award for Best Horror Novel, a World Fantasy Award finalist, an Indie Next pick, a Library Reads Top 10 pick, Library Journal Editor's pick, a starred review from Library Journal and Publishers Weekly, and named one of the best 50 horror books of all time by Esquire. So, obviously, also, I'm not the only one who loved this book. This one's a bit odd, I will tell you. At the beginning, you're going to wonder, what on earth? And you might even want to put it down, but don't. I promise. The payoff is worth it. Catriona Ward pulls the rug out from under you so many times in this book. Every time you think you're like, oh, I know what's going on. No, you don't. It's so good. Catriona Ward's The Last House on Needless Street is a shocking and immersive read, perfect for fans of Gone Girl and The Haunting of Hill House. Also very good books. In a boarded-up house on a dead-end street at the edge of the wild Washington woods lives a family of 3. A teenage girl who isn't allowed outside, not after last time. A man who drinks alone in front of his TV, trying to ignore the gaps in his memory. And a house cat who loves napping and reading the Bible. An unspeakable secret binds them together, but when a new neighbor moves in next door, what is buried out among the birch trees may come back to haunt them all. So good. Those are my top 3 faves for now. And next, I'm going to tell you about some very recently released books that are also top favorites. Starting off with The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. A Los Angeles Times Book Prize winner and a New York Times notable book, winner of the Bram Stoker Award and the Shirley Jackson Award. So, once again, I have good taste in horror. This book takes place in Gracetown, Florida in June 1950. 12-year-old Robbie Stevens Jr. is sentenced to 6 months at the Gracetown School for Boys, a reformatory, for kicking the son of the largest landowner in town in defense of his older sister Gloria. So begins Robbie's journey further into the terrors of the Jim Crow South and the very real horror of the school they call the Reformatory. Robbie has a talent for seeing ghosts, or haints, but what was once a comfort to him after the loss of his mother has become a window to the truth of what happens at the Reformatory. Boys forced to work to remediate their so-called crimes have gone missing, but the haints Robbie sees hint at worse things. Though his friends Redbone and Blue, Robbie is learning just not the rules of how to survive. Meanwhile, Gloria is rallying every family member in connection in Florida to find a way to get Robbie out before it's too late. The Reformatory is a haunting work of historical fiction written as only American Book Award winner author Tananarive Due could, by piecing together the life of the relative her family never spoke of and bringing his tragedy and those of so many others at the infamous Dozier School for Boys to light in this riveting novel. So there is truth and history woven so deeply in this book, it is heartbreaking and terrifying. Next up, Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay. A chilling twist on the cursed film genre from the best-selling author of The Pallbearers Club and The Cabin at the End of the World. In June 1993, a group of young guerrilla filmmakers spent 4 weeks making Horror Movie, a notorious, disturbing art house horror flick. The weird part? Only 3 of the film's scenes were ever released to the public, but Horror Movie has nevertheless grown a rabid fan base. 3 decades later, Hollywood is pushing for a big-budget reboot, just like they reboot all the movies. The man who played the Thin Kid is the only surviving cast member. He remembers all too well the secrets buried within the original screenplay, the bizarre events of the filming, and the dangerous crossed lines on the set that resulted in tragedy. As memories flood back in, the boundaries between reality and film, past and present, start to blur. But he's going to help remake the film, even if it means navigating a world of cynical producers, egomaniacal directors, and surreal fan conventions. Demons of the past be damned. But at what cost? Horror movie is an obsessive, psychologically chilling, and suspenseful feat of storytelling genius that builds inexorably to an unforgettable, mind-bending conclusion. This one came out pretty recently. Highly recommend. Another very recent release just came out in June, We Used to Live Here by Marcus Kliewer. Get Out meets Parasite in this eerily haunting debut and Reddit hit and soon-to-be Netflix original movie starring Blake Lively about two homeowners whose lives are turned upside down when the house's previous residents unexpectedly visit. As a young queer couple who flip houses, Charlie and Eve can't believe the killer deal they've just gotten on an old house in a picturesque neighborhood. As they're working in the house one day, there's a knock on the door. A man stands there with his family, claiming to have lived there years before and asking if it would be all right if he showed his kids around. People pleaser to a fault, Eve lets them in. As soon as the strangers enter their home, uncanny and inexplicable things start happening, including the family's youngest child going missing and a ghostly presence materializing in the basement. Even more weird, the family can't seem to take the hint that their visit should be over, and when Charlie suddenly vanishes, Eve slowly loses her grip on reality. Something is terribly wrong with the house and with the visiting family. Or is Eve just imagining things? Lots of folks saying this is the scariest book they've read this year. So definitely recommend checking it out. Next up, House of Bone and Rain by Gabino Iglesias. In the latest from Shirley Jackson and Bram Stoker award-winning author of The Devil Takes You Home, a group of young men seek vengeance after one of their mothers is murdered in a Puerto Rican slum. Stand by me with a haunted, obsidian dark heart. For childhood friends Gabe, Xavier, Tavo, Paul, and Bimbo, death has always been close. Hurricanes, car accidents, gang violence, suicide. We are surrounded by ghosts is Gabe's grandmother's refrain. But this time is different. Bimbo's mom has been shot dead. We're gonna kill the guys who killed her, Bimbo swears, and they all agree. Feral with grief, Bimbo has become unrecognizable, taking no prisoners in his search for names. Soon they learn Maria was gunned down by guys working for a drunk kingpin of Puerto Rico. No one has ever gone up against him and survived. As the boys strategize, a storm gathers far from the coast. Hurricanes are known to carry evil spirits in their currents and bring them ashore, spirits which impose their own order. Blurring the boundaries between myth, mysticism, and the grim realities of our world, House of Bone and Rain is a harrowing coming-of-age story, a doomed tale of devotion, the afterlife of violence, and what rolls in on the tide. Gabino's another one who will horrify you and break your heart at the same time. This book I was reading on my Kindle and I was 2% in when he made me cry for the first, but not last time. So, box of tissues and a nightlight for this one. Next up, Kill Your Darling by Clay McLeod Chapman. The acclaimed author of Ghost Eaters and What Kind of Mother Comes to Bad Hand books. The body of Glenn Partridge's 15-year-old son was discovered in a vacant lot nearly 40 years ago. The police are still no closer to finding the murderer decades later. Glenn refuses to let the memory of his son fade or let anyone else within the small working-class community forget. His long-suffering wife signs him up for an amateur fiction writing workshop at the local library just to get him out of the house and out of his own head. Rule number 1. Write what you know, so Glenn decides to share his son's story. The class offers him a chance to make sense of a senseless crime and find the fictional closure life never provided. But as Glenn's story takes on a life of its own, someone from the past is compelled to come out of hiding before he reaches the end. I love Clay's work, and I hope you will too. So those are the recently released books that I'm recommending for you. So up next, I have 5 soon-to-be-released horror novels. I have read some of them because I got a sneak peek ahead. So I am definitely recommending them, but these ones will be available soon. Or in the case of 2 of them, the first 2, by the time you see this, they're out last week. But right now, it's a month from now. Well, look these ones up. You're going to want to read them. First up, Coup de Grace by Sophia Ajram. a mind-bending and visceral experimental horror about a young man trapped in an infinite Montreal subway station, perfect for readers of Mark Z. Danielewski, who wrote House of Leaves, and Susanna Clark, who wrote Piranesi. Vicken has a plan. Throw himself into the St. Lawrence River in Montreal and end it all for good, believing it to be the only way out for him after a lifetime of depression and pain. But, stepping off the subway, he finds himself in an endless looping station. Determined to find a way out again, he starts to explore the rooms and corridors ahead of him. But no matter how many claustrophobic hallways or vast cathedral-esque rooms he passes through, the exit is nowhere in sight. The more he explores his strange new prison, the more he becomes convinced that he hasn't been trapped there accidentally, and amongst the shadows and concrete, he comes to realize that he almost certainly is not alone. A terrifying psychological nightmare from a powerful new voice in horror. This is one I got to read ahead of time, and it's so good. But it also, tissue's handy. I read it on an airplane, and someone actually asked me if I was okay. I wasn't. It's really good. Next up, we have Model Home by Rivers Solomon. Welcome to Rivers Solomon's dark and wondrous Model Home, a new kind of haunted house novel. The three Maxwell siblings keep their distance from the lily-white gated enclave outside Dallas where they grew up. When their family moved there, they were the only black family in the neighborhood. The neighbors acted nice enough, but right away bad things, scary things, the strange and the unexplainable began to happen in their house. Maybe it was some cosmic trial, a demonic rite of passage into the upper middle class. Whatever it was, the Maxwells, steered by their formidable mother, stayed put, unwilling to abandon their home, terrors and trauma be damned. As adults, the siblings could finally get away from the horrors of home, leaving their parents all alone in the house. But when news of their parents' death arrives, Esri is forced to return to Texas with their sisters Eve and Emmanuel to reckon with their family's past and present, to find out what happened while they were away. It was not a natural death for their parents, but was it supernatural? Rivers Solomon turns the haunted house story on its head, unearthing the dark legacies of segregation and racism in the suburban American South. Unbridled, raw, and daring, Model Home is the story of secret histories uncovered and of a queer family battling for their right to live, grieve, and heal among the terrors of contemporary American life. I guess what I'm saying is I really like books that are scary and break your heart. I'm spotting the theme just now, so they're so good. Next up, All the Hearts You Eat by Haley Piper. A visceral and heartbreaking work of Gothic horror about small-town mysteries, local folklore, and the things we leave behind when we're gone, from Bram Stoker award-winning author of Queen of Teeth. What really happened to Cabrina Bright? Ivory's life changes irrevocably when she discovers the body of Cabrina Bright on the sands of Cape Morning, along with a mysterious poem. How did she die? And why does it seem she was trying to swim to Ghost Cat Island, the center of so many local mysteries? Desperate to uncover the answers surrounding Cabrina's death, and haunted by her discovery, Ivory begins to see the pale ghost of Cabrina, only to shake it off as a mere hallucination. But Ivory's not alone. Cabrina's closest friends have also seen a similar apparition, and as they toy with occult possibilities, they begin to unravel the truth behind Cabrina's